All right, good evening. We're going to go ahead and get started. It's good to see all of you here. We had no idea when we put this invitations flyer out if we would have 5 people or 55 people, somewhere in between. It's great to see you. We were saying that we're all a little out of the practice of in-person events here in the school district. But my name is Martha Ryan-Toy. I'm the superintendent here. A pleasure to see all of you. Some of you I know, and some of you I would love to meet in the future. Carrie Goldman is our speaker tonight. I'm going to say just a few words about her in just a minute. I just want to start by thanking, I know Dan Hunt, our Board of Education president, is here as a parent and a participant tonight, but also always want to thank our Board of Education for the work they do and also for supporting opportunities like this. Social emotional learning is always a very, very important part of our work in school districts. It feels particularly important right now, particularly important as our children are kind of experiencing the effects of the pandemic, and certainly the social world is kind of reopened, and that's great, but we want to make sure that we are supporting and teaching and guiding our students both as parents and as educators. So thank you always for that partnership. We have several members of our district leadership team here that I also want to introduce. So April May and Chris Arbalas are here from Hauser, our principal and assistant principal. Angela Dozel, our director of teaching and learning, and Nora Garrity, our Associate Director for Special Education and Student Services. So all leaders in making sure that our school environment is that just right fit for students in terms of that social emotional learning area. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Carrie. She said she has a lot of material, probably more than we can cover tonight. But Carrie came to the district, I think it was in 2017. And, we forget as educators when we do things once that, lives change, children grow up, get older, new kids come to the district, older children move on from the district. And I think it was our principals that said, we need to have Carrie Goldman back. She had a great conversation with parents back a number of years ago. So if you happen to hear her then, your life situation, I'm sure it's different, pandemic, children getting older, et cetera, et cetera. So Carrie's written a book on bullied and social conflict. She shares it there. Carrie lives in the Chicagoland area, does a lot of work in this area of really helping children navigate social interactions with others. She's going to come back and work with our Hauser team specifically. And then she's also going to present assemblies for students in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade here in the month of October. So we're excited about all that, and I'm going to turn it over to Carrie.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to use the microphone just because I am a small person and maybe have a small voice, so I want to make sure you can hear me. First, I just want to say thank you that you came out. I know as a parent myself that it's really hard to mobilize at the end of the day. And so I'm super appreciative of your time and your presence. I already feel great affection for the people who are here because it means you really care about these topics because you took the time to come, and that just speaks very strongly about you being here. I also want you to know that I tend to have a lot of information. I am very excited about these topics, and I do a lot of research. I write about them. This is what I do, and so my slides are very information heavy. What I want you to know is I am more than happy to make a PDF of the slide deck available to anyone. So instead of feeling like you have to remember something or write a tip down or anything like that, just sit. It's the end of the day. Relax, listen, and I'm a big sharer of resources. So any slides I have, you can have later. I only ask that you don't put them up online. I would ask that you don't put them in a public place, but happy to share. So with that, let's get started. And then I will, if you have questions, why don't we do questions at the end? Because sometimes questions that people ask end up being something that would be covered in a subsequent part of the presentation. So if you can all see, I will get us going. So one of the things I just want to start with is that we have found that one of the biggest predictors of whether kids will be respectful at school is how connected they feel to their school. And so I'd like you to go home and ask your kids, who do you feel connected to at school? You know, who is it? Is it your classmates? Is it your teachers? Is it a coach? And in particular, when we have kids who feel a close connection to an adult, and that adult at school prioritizes kindness or inclusion or models the types of behaviors we want, it has a big influence on the kids. So if you have a school where kids are really disrespectful to each other and struggling, one of the things you can do is strengthen their connections to staff members and teachers who can then model for them, hey, that's not cool. You know, hey, that's not how we talk to each other, because if they care and they like that staff member, they'll actually listen. So it's kind of fun to just check in with kids and say, who are your connections with? And if you have a kid who does not have connections at school, that's informative too. It means that they need more groups. They need to have places where they have people, whether it's a sport team or a theater or their church or wherever. If you've got a kid who's really lonely and struggling, let's look for more groups. So that is just a little piece of background. And I'm going to start now with basically teaching the difference between bullying and normal social conflict. And the reason it's important to know the difference is because the way that we as adults should respond is actually quite different depending on which situation it is. Now, I know as a mother, anytime I hear my kids say someone's being mean to me, I want to jump in. And so it's really, really hard. And I even have to use my own parameters on myself and say, okay, let me check. Is this social conflict or bullying? This will help me know what to do. So I'm going to share that with you. So first of all, when we talk about bullying, it's really hard to use the words bully and victim. No one wants to hear that their kid is a bully, and no one wants to think of their kid as a victim. So I try in my own presentations to use the word aggressor and target. A target is a little less personal. It's just you got targeted. You're not victimized. It doesn't speak to who you are. And an aggressor is better than calling someone a bully, because once a kid is labeled the bully, it can be really hard for a child to come back from that. And if you have a kid, for example, who in second grade is an aggressor, and you say to your kid, stay away from that kid, you know, that kid's a bully. If they start to become friends in seventh grade, your child's going to hide it from you, because they'll remember you didn't like that kid. And they don't want you to know that you're hanging out with someone that they remember you didn't like. So we want to avoid labeling kids so that our children won't hide their future friendships from us when they're teenagers, because relationships shift. And sometimes your kids become good friends with people they used to struggle with. So, I went the wrong direction. Give me 1 second. So the way you understand the difference between bullying and conflict starts with understanding teasing. Teasing, in an acceptable form, meaning the kind that's fun, has basically a situation where both the kid who's doing the teasing and the kid who's the target are laughing and having fun. If both kids are enjoying it and laughing about it and think it's funny, then that is teasing, and it is an important part of relating to peers, and it is an important part of learning how to be a social being, is to know how to have fun teasing. The problem isn't fun teasing. The problem is taunting. And taunting is what happens when you have one kid or a group of kids who's laughing and having fun, and you have the target who inside is feeling embarrassed or scared or sad or worried. Now, in the littlest of children, they tend to show how they're feeling. They might come right to a teacher or a parent and say, hey, people are being mean to me. It gets trickier as you move into the, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th grades because they want to preserve their social status. So they may, in front of the group, they might actually look like they're having fun, but secretly they're feeling bad. And so what you have to do is teach kids what do you do? What do you do if you feel bad? And if you feel bad, this is what you do. You teach your kid to pull aside, not in front of the group, pull aside the person who is doing the taunting and say to them, hey, I didn't like when you called me that, or I didn't like that meme you made about me, or whatever it is. Chances are the kid who did it will say, oh, I was just kidding. Your child can now say, fine. If kidding means we're both having fun, so now that you know I actually didn't like it, you won't do it again if you were just kidding. And if you do it again, I'll know that you are doing it with intent to make me feel bad. So you can't keep using that I'm just kidding excuse. It's really a very simple explanation. So if it happens again and the child says, hey, I told you I was just kidding, your kid can say, no, remember, kidding means we're both laughing, and I already told you yesterday I didn't think it was funny. You're trying to weaponize this. You're taunting. It's not okay. And for adults to have this language is very important too, because there will be times when you call another parent or talk to someone and they'll say, my kid was just kidding. And if you have this language where you can say, actually, my child told your child the other day that it's not at all funny. So it's with intent. And the whole point of saying I was just kidding is to act like there wasn't intent. So it's a pretty simple way to try and shut that dynamic down. And even the youngest of children can do it. I've seen 4 and 5-year-olds pick up on the difference and be able to say, no, that's not teasing, that's taunting. So let me get okay. When you think about your children and you think about their group interactions, one of the things you can do to help them become more emotionally intelligent in their own friendship groups is just kind of see, is your kid like gregarious and outspoken and the one who's always the leader and tends to make a lot of jokes and do a lot of teasing? If you've got that kid, teach your child how to kind of pull aside someone that they tend to target and say, hey, are you okay with this? In a private place? Like, it's fun for me, but are we okay? And if you happen to have the kid who's always being targeted, ask your child, do you feel like you could pull aside that kid from your group and tell them, I actually really am uncomfortable with this? Because if your children learn that type of emotional intelligence on how do I feel around my friends and how do my friends feel around me, they do a better job having balanced friendships. And it's a skill that we as adults actually also tend to need. So how does bullying differ from teasing? Bullying has 3 qualities, and you must have all 3 for a situation to truly be bullying. It's repetitive, it's unwanted, and that's where we get to the not kidding part. It's where someone is not having fun. And most importantly for bullying, there is a power difference. The kid who is being targeted feels or is in less power than the child who's doing the behavior. And one of the ways you'll know if your child is being bullied is eventually fear develops in the child who's being bullied. They start to not want to go to the place where the bullying's happening. It's, I don't want to go to school. I don't want to go to my sports practice. I don't want to go to that art class, because they are trying to avoid it, which is a very understandable reaction. So when we have this power balance, it could look like a lot of things. It could be multiple kids against one kid, a bigger kid against a smaller kid. It could be a child with more social capital. The easiest way to ask if there's a power imbalance is to say, do you feel like that kid could make people stop eating lunch with you? Does that kid have the power to take away your friends? If a kid is afraid of saying to someone else, hey, I don't like what you're doing, because they're afraid the next day they'll be alone, that's a social power imbalance, and it's very real. We can measure power imbalance with the older children. We look at their Instagram followers. We look at their actual social power. Do you reach 2,000 people when you make a funny meme about someone, or do you reach 500? So This is all very relevant. So who can be bullied? Well, the truth is anybody can be bullied. And with that knowledge, there are groups of people who are at increased risk, and it's anyone who's different from the status quo. It could be racial and ethnic minorities, religious minorities, people with larger body sizes. There's a huge amount of fat-based bullying in this country. People with any kind of different appearance, people with behavioral differences, kids on the spectrum, kids with ADHD, kids with sensory issues. These are a very unique group because they tend to be what we call bully victims, meaning that because of their impulsivity, kids with behavioral differences often are aggressive or do aggressive things and misread social cues and act aggressively, and they're often targeted. So they're often lonely and don't have friends and are picked on, so they're both, and they're at the most risk for needing a lot of intervention. But if you're different in any way, that makes you at risk. LGBTQIA kids, anything that would make you stand out. And particularly as you enter middle school, the desire to conform is the biggest in middle school. So kids are the most afraid of being different from the group in middle school. So a lot of times when we are in moments of stress or uncertainty, that's when our implicit biases come out. It's not when we're having a great interaction with someone. It's when you feel threatened or angry. Imagine, for example, someone cuts you off with their car, and in that split second, all you get is a glimpse of the driver. You know nothing about them. All you can see is their age or their gender or their skin color. And in that moment when you're mad or stressed or threatened, that's when your brain jumps to these implicit biases, thinking old people can't drive, women can't drive, whatever it is. So we want to teach our kids that this happens to children too. When they are stressed or upset, that's when their biases come out. And what we have to do is remember that no group of people is a monolith, and that we can challenge this by saying to ourselves, we all grow up with bias, but we need to get to know people better as individuals and really push back against those thoughts, especially when we are feeling upset. Another thing that is a big contributor to bullying is that many of us, myself included, grew up in a very binary world. And it's different now. Things are changing and shifting. And binary stereotypes really overwhelmingly teach girls that what it means to be a girl is to be sexy, attractive, a people pleaser, to smile, to not rock the boat. And overwhelmingly, gender binary teaches boys to be, masculine leaders, don't show your vulnerabilities. And for children who don't conform to these very narrow stereotypes, they're at more risk of being bullied. And you can really see it right now. It's the time of year you go into a Halloween costume shop, and it's just amazing. The gender-based marketing is so binary. The costumes for girls are so heavily sexy police officer, sexy fire girl, sexy princess, sexy cat, even for the toddlers. And the costumes for the boys are also hypersexualized, the giant muscle bodies of the superheroes. And it's hard. It's hard to be a kid. It's really hard. And they feel a lot of pressure. So it helps for us to keep in mind that the binary view contributes to a lot of misogynistic and homophobic bullying. And we have to push back against that and recognize there are all different ways to be a boy or a girl or a human being. And it's okay. And that is a big part of the bullying that's happening in this country. So when people have a bullying situation, groups do often respond by blaming the victim. And the reason is, quite frankly, it's easier for a group. It is much easier for a group to say, well, your kid's too sensitive, or your kid is provoking other people, or your kid is the problem, than to say, okay, we've got to look at how everyone is responding. The truth is, if we aren't looking at how the bystanders are responding, how the aggressors are responding, and any behaviors that need work, if you have a child who, for example, needs some pro-social behavior learning, then that should happen. But if that's the only thing that's happening, if it's only the burden of changing is only placed on the child who's the target, then that's a victim blaming mentality. And so it's really great when schools do this type of training and bring people in, because schools are an institution and many schools do victim blame and force the kid out who is the trouble. And it's a problem. So having these types of discussions where people are coming to learn is just wonderful and fantastic. There's another type of bullying that happens, and it's not necessarily based on your race or your gender or your religion. It often happens to kids within the same friendship group. You might have a group of kids, same age, same everything, and there's a queen bee, or there's a kingpin. And anyone seen Mean Girls, the movie Mean Girls? They do a beautiful job of illustrating social climbing bullying. Children have learned that you can successfully elevate your social status by bullying other kids and making them fear you. And so when you have within a friendship group, if you have a friendship group of 4 or 5 kids that are seen as a group to the rest of the school, but within their group, they're having horrible bullying, the answer is to kind of pull them together and say, listen, we got to call this out for what it is. Everyone thinks we're this group of best friends, and yet when we're together, we're anxious and we're miserable and we're frightened and insecure. This is not how a group of best friends should feel around each other. And kids have to call it out and say, let's not do that to our friend. Let's not do the mean things behind their back. Let's not do the sneaky, digital 2-way chat happening while there's also a 4-way chat happening and 2 of us are talking about someone who we're also group chatting with. Let's not do that. The reality is no one deserves to be mistreated at school, full stop. Even if you have the child who's a pain. Maybe your kid's annoying. I have an annoying child, so I can tell you. I have one of my children, I love him, I adore him, and he's very annoying. He's high energy, he's neurodivergent, he's wonderful, but he leaves wreckage in his wake as he moves through my house, and he can be very annoying. And one of the things that we always tell his siblings is, if somebody annoys you because of who they are, maybe they chew loudly or they make funny sounds, they're not trying to harm you. Right? They might be annoying you, but they're not trying to cause you harm. It's just, this is part of who they are. If you choose to respond with deliberate cruelty by attacking that person, by ostracizing that person, by telling that person that they're a loser, that they're weird, that they suck, then you're choosing to respond to someone's unintentional behaviors with intentional harm, and that's just not okay. It's not okay to be deliberately unkind, even when you find someone annoying. And these are the types of discussions that are very important to have with kids, because kids, if they find another child annoying, will kick that kid out of their group in a hot second. And we end up with kids who are ostracized and lonely. And it's really hard and it's painful. What we also want to do is, if you have one of those kids who is being targeted, teach your kids to cognitively reframe what's happening, because the number one thing kids will say to themselves is, what did I do wrong? If you've ever had a kid who was kicked out of a friendship group or just dropped or targeted, your kid will say, I don't know what I did. What did I do wrong? And they start to implicitly blame themselves. Why is this happening to me? The truth is, you did nothing wrong. And we want to teach those kids how to say to themselves, I'm being mistreated because someone else is choosing to be unkind. I'm not being mistreated because I'm flawed or unworthy. And if we can help kids think that way, it's protective against some of the anxiety, the depression, self-harm, all of the things that happen, because we help the kids recognize that this isn't a flaw about me, that I am okay as who I am. And so the more we can get kids to have a daily affirmation, I'm awesome. I don't deserve this. I'm a good person. Those things will be protective against the feelings of self-esteem that batter a child who struggles socially. So we just talked a lot about bullying situations. I want to talk about normal social conflict, because bullying bullying should not happen, right? Like it's a behavior that is bad and shouldn't happen. Normal social conflict is part of being human. You cannot avoid it. As humans, as sentient beings, we will have conflict. So we have to understand what's conflict, what's normal, and what's not. Basically, social conflict can be repetitive and unwanted. Like, people could be mean on purpose and it could happen over and over. And most importantly, it does not include a power imbalance. Neither kid thinks that the other child's going to take away their friendship table at lunch. It could be two kids who ask for a play date, and every day it ends in a fight, and every day it ends with people mad at each other and crying. And the next day they're like, I want to hang out with so-and-so. And you as a parent are like, oh my God, I just want to tear my hair out. But if 40% of the time kid A starts the problems, and 40% of the time, or 60% of the time kid B, or whatever it is, if there's some balance and neither kid really is scared of the other's power, this is normal social conflict. Social conflict, another way to help you sort it out, is social conflict is almost always about a thing, like something external to the relationship. It's two kids who want the same position on a sports team, two kids who have a crush on the same third child, two kids who want the attention of a queen bee in their group. It's two kids who both want a turn on a video game. And if you take away the thing, then that relationship would have been fine at that moment, right? If you didn't have the new kid enter their grade who suddenly is friends with them, that friendship might have been fine. Or if they're not both trying to get on the basketball team and there's one spot, things would be fine. So it's these external things that create conflict. Bullying is more internal identity based. It's when someone isn't, it's not I'm mad at you because you took my toy. It's you're a loser, you're ugly, you're stupid, you're a slur. This is where we see the biases come out. We see cruel things coming out about appearance and race and gender. So that's more internal. You can't separate out. You can't say, well, if I weren't a woman, then, this conflict wouldn't happen. I mean, I'm a woman, that's who I am. Or well, if I weren't so short, then our relationship would be fine. Being short is part of my identity. And so if your kid is coming home and saying, hey, people are being mean to me, there's questions to ask. How long has this been going on? Is it repetitive? And, is it about a certain thing? Like, was there an inciting event? Something that happened? Or is this person just being mean for the sake of being mean? And do you feel like you could pull them aside and tell them how you feel? Or are you afraid if you do, things will get worse for you and they'll retaliate? All of these things help you assess out, is this conflict or is there a power imbalance? Is it repetitive? Is it, does my child feel like they can talk about it? And all of these are the questions we should investigate before we jump on the phone and go mad. So as adults, how should we respond? This is probably the hardest thing I think about being a parent. And in social conflict, where there's no power imbalance, we should stay out of it as much as possible. That doesn't mean we can't help facilitate conversations or talk to kids about it, but ultimately in normal social conflict, it should not be a parent-to-parent resolution. We should not swoop in and fix it, because then the kids don't learn how to resolve conflict, and that creates its own problems. So if it's normal social conflict, you ideally want your child and the child that they are in conflict with in some form, whether it's a restorative conversation or with parents, or somehow sit and be face to face and get a chance to tell each other, here's how I feel. Remember, that's a normal social conflict where there's no power imbalance, so no one's afraid. It's the exact opposite in bullying. If you have a child who's being bullied, you don't want to stay out of it. You need to intervene because you need to separate. You never want a child who's being bullied to have to try and talk it out with their aggressor, because due to the power imbalance, it will never end well for your child. It's impossible. And putting a child who's being bullied into a situation where they're supposed to make the bullying stop on their own is a victim blaming response. So, social conflict, step back, offer advice, have the kids talk, how did it go, try this. Bullying, step in, separate, start all the processes you do with bullying, social support and therapists and school investigation and all the things that come along. But it's really two very different dynamics. The reason we want to have kids talk it out in some form in person when they're in conflict is if kids don't learn how to resolve social conflict, it can escalate into bullying. And it's very much a vulnerability now, especially after a couple of years of remote and COVID, because kids have had enormous exposure to screens and entertainment models jumping to bullying. So reality-based TV or YouTube clips or anything. Think about it. If there's a bunch of competing things for your child's attention online, if there's something that says 2 kids got in a fight and talked it out nicely, or 2 kids got in a fight and look what happened next, came to blows, they're gonna click on look what happened next because it's more drama. And so the model they're getting when they watch these shows and a lot of reality TV is you're mad at someone, you take them down. You jump straight to the mean behavior, you jump to the attack, you gather your friends and allies to attack them. This is a terrible model, and we have to talk with kids about it because there's a whole step that's missing in between. They miss the years of growing up with like the facts of life and the wonder years and different strokes, where the whole plot would be here's a conflict, let's all talk it out, and now it's better. So they're not getting that model. And one of the ways I see this play out, especially, is when there is an imbalanced friendship or relationship. You have 2 kids who have been friends, a new kid enters the grade or enters the picture. One kid starts to kind of become friends with that new person. The child who's being dropped is feeling all kinds of feelings, and if they don't know how to talk about it and work on it, they often do jump to mean behaviors, and then people jump to retaliate. Often, a parent will call the school and say, hey, my kid's being bullied, and it's probably true, like something's going on, but when you dig into it, you might find that their child who's being bullied also was bullying someone. This is what's happening. It's normal social conflict that escalates into bullying behaviors on all sides because nobody knows how to focus on the real issue, which is their feelings. And that's what we're going to talk about in the second half. So, a couple tips. We want to de-escalate conflict wherever possible, not escalate it. One of the best ways to de-escalate conflict, teach kids to resolve conflict without having a friend act as a mediator. If a friend says, I'll go talk to them for you, no, you want to keep control of your own message because friends have their own agenda. You never know if a friend has their own crush on someone or is trying to elevate their own social status. And so when kids have a conflict, all conversations should be directly with the person they're having the conflict with. It should not be in a group forum. It should not be at lunch. It should not be in front of the lockers. It should not be on a social news feed. It shouldn't happen on your news feed of your Instagram page. It should be private. And this allows you to have a de-escalation instead of bringing in huge groups where suddenly you have 5 or 10 kids all involved in a problem that really should have been resolved with the 2 original kids. I've worked with thousands of kids across the country over the past probably 10 to 15 years. And one of the things I've seen is that many kids who are mean are actually anxious. They are anxious kids. They are socially anxious, and they have poor coping mechanisms for their anxiety, and they do mean things to other children because they're trying to soothe their own anxiety. And so if you have a kid who struggles with this, ask the child, have you ever felt insecure and as a result done something unkind to a friend? If that's what's happening, let's teach our kids how to focus on inner conflict. Inner conflict is saying, wow, what's happening is I feel jealous. I feel envious. I feel like I want to do something mean to that kid, but it's not because that kid did something to me. It's not really a social conflict.
It's that I'm feeling inner conflict. I'm jealous of what they have. So we want to teach kids to normalize talking about and expressing, I'm envious, I'm jealous. If we can recognize that instead of making it shameful, then kids can recognize, oh, I know why I want to do something mean. I've got to deal with my own feelings of envy. And this is very healthy. Good friendships should feel comforting, not terrifying. So one question you might want to ask your kids is, how do you feel when you are with your friends? Like, if you're with your group of friends and you feel welcomed and included and like yourself, and you can be friends with whoever else you want. No one's telling you, don't talk to them. Great. If you have a child who's like constantly terrified of being dropped or being harmed by their friends, then this is a situation where we have to ask our kids, okay, what do you need to feel more secure in your friendships? What is it that's happening? Because friendships should be a place where you are restored and repaired. And this is true for adults as well, by the way. When we go and look at things like this, like these deep feelings, a big part of it is helping kids to normalize and understand feelings of envy. Because envy will start at the youngest of ages. Someone's going to have a bigger toy. Someone's going to have a skinnier body, a prettier face, taller, whatever it is that your kid is insecure about, better athlete. And so there's two kinds of envy. Productive envy is when a child sees something that someone else has, and it is something that could be attainable, and it makes them want to work harder. Maybe you see a friend get a really great grade on a math test, and it makes you think, you know what, I'm going to study harder, or I want to work harder. Okay, that's fine, that's productive. But then there's another kind of envy, and it's destructive. And it's if there's not much you can do about the situation, meaning someone has something that you can't have or won't have, and you're never going to have it, and you let it fester, and then you do things to be destructive toward that person to cope with your feelings of envy, that's the thing we want to avoid. So we want to teach kids to identify, when they feel envy, and is it something that they can act on in a productive way without harming anyone? Is it something where they could do something to work towards a goal? Or is it something they need to radically accept? Wow, I wish I had that bigger house. I don't. And that's not going to change. So I'm going to work to just know that that's the way it is and focus on something I do have. When kids have conflicts, the human instinct for both kids and adults is to focus on justifying, I did it because. Here's why. Here's what you did to me. A restorative approach will resolve conflict much better than trying to focus on justifying your own behaviors. Because if you try and justify, it becomes a he said, she said. Well, I did this because. Well, I did this because. Well, I did this because. So what we want to do is switch it all, move away from justification, and teach kids after a conflict simply to say, what would make it better? How can I make it better? I think this is far more effective than a forced apology. Saying to a child, tell them you're sorry, is useless because both parties know that it's usually insincere. And the child who's been harmed will stop coming to adults for help if all they get is, okay, well, they apologize, because they don't feel any better because they know it was insincere. So that doesn't help. Instead of having someone apologize, ask what would make it better. Now, if the child who's been wrong says, well, I really do want an apology, then, that's something to talk about. Sometimes they just want the mean behavior to stop. They might say, I just want you to let me do my thing in peace at school. I don't want you to pick on me. I don't even want the kid to be punished. I just want them to let me be. So we want to ask, what would make it better? And I have my kids do this. So I've got kids between the ages of 12 and 19. And when they're fighting, and we've done this for many years, if there's a fight between the siblings, it's never apologize to your sister, apologize to your brother. It's you need to ask them, what would make this better for you? And sometimes there's very concrete actions the kids come up with that make it better, help clean my room because you messed it up when you threw everything around, or, make my sandwich for tomorrow because you took my sandwich out of my lunch and ate it in the middle of the night. Whatever naughty thing they've done. When someone acts out as adults, one of the things that's hard for us is that we often respond with a feeling of, what is wrong with that kid, right? If someone harms our kid, what is wrong with you? Shift the thinking. A more like trauma-informed response would be, let's shift our thinking to what happened to you that made you act this way. If you watch Ted Lasso, you'll know that he talks about being curious and not judgmental. And it's a really brilliant approach to conflict. And even with our own kids. So if your kid doesn't, if your kid does something that you think was absolutely ludicrously foolish, before we switch to what's wrong with you, ask, so what happened that made you do that? What was happening right before that moment? What's your story? Like, let's find your story. And this helps us empathize with people and with children who act out, and then we're less likely to want to punish them and more likely to want to help them with whatever competency they're missing. The whole goal of social emotional learning is really to identify missing core competencies in kids and teach it. So if you have a child who gossips a lot, for example, instead of saying, oh, that's a mean kid, that's a mean girl, you would say, what core social emotional competency is this person missing? Oh, probably empathy, right? This person is not empathizing with other people. So what we need to do is work on empathy. If you have a child who has, is lashing out or hitting people, what social emotional competency are they missing? Well, probably impulse control and, an appreciation of impact of behaviors on others. Let's work on these things. So it's really not about put you in timeout or call you bad. It's what can we grow? And proper social emotional learning at school is to fill in those competencies so that children are more effective in how they relate to the world. How can we as adults validate our kids when they're having emotional distress? So when your kid comes to you and they're upset, it's really the way to soothe them the fastest is to avoid statements that start with you should have or you shouldn't have. So we in our family, we say, don't should all over me, do not should all over me. Nobody should be shoulding. And simply, the other thing that we struggle with as adults often is that we validate our view and not the child's view. So we might say, oh, it's really not a big deal. Don't worry about it. But they're already worried about it. So instead, let's validate what they're feeling. Oh, I can see you're upset that you're having this problem with your friend. And instead of saying, oh, they're probably just jealous of you, it's nothing, just ignore them. Let's say, I can see you're upset, that's really hard. And part of this is around distress tolerance, saying it's okay to be upset. Sometimes we're upset. And so telling a child who's anxious, don't be anxious, you'll be fine, it just won't soothe them. What will soothe them is saying, I can see that anxiety, I'm here with you. I'm holding space with you. It won't always be this hard, but I can see it's really hard right now. What do you need to get yourself from a level 10 in anxiety down to a level 7? If you have a kid who's refusing to go to school because of anxiety or a test, okay, I can see, you're at a very high level of distress right now. And that's okay to be distressed, but what do you need from me to help you be at a lower level of distress? These will be more effective at getting your kids to do the things you want them to do than saying, don't feel that way. Kids are big into being validated. My kids love to talk about being validated. They're very valid people, apparently. For parents or teachers that have a history of your own social pain, if you were bullied, if you were targeted, if you were discriminated against, if you have been harmed, it is very hard when your children have normal social conflict, and even harder if they're being bullied, because you're bringing all of your own pain into it. And so in that case, sometimes what we see is that kids will hide from those parents what's happening because they want to protect the feelings of the parents. And if that's what's happening, what we have to do as adults, hold on, besides the mic, is, let me turn it off. Okay, did that work? Yes. So most things, if you turn them off and then on, it just makes such a difference. If that's what's happening, remind yourself that do your work for yourself. Get yourself the therapist, get yourself the comforts, because we are the adults and the children need us, and they need to have a safe space to come with their distress. And so if it's triggering and painful, do what you need to do to help take care of yourself so that you can be there to take care of your child. Sometimes the best thing that we can do for a distraught child is be that soft landing under their tightrope. You know, we can't join them up on the tightrope. We might not know how they got up on that tightrope. Sometimes they're just there. And all we can do is say, I will catch you when you fall. You know, home will always be a place where you have some respite, and a place where you're accepted, and a place where you're okay. And as children, never underestimate the power of your children to connect with an adult at school. A child who has a good relationship with a social worker or a single teacher who opens their classroom at lunch or a coach. Some kids, especially in middle school, only get through the day because of that adult that they're connected with who is helping them out. So now we're going to shift into, and I'm checking my time, of course I'm like way behind time. We're going to do a quick discussion of social anxiety and coping skills because I think it's pretty prevalent. So post-remote schooling, we're seeing more social anxiety, and not just in children, it's in adults too. Some kids are more vulnerable to it, kids who have perfectionism, shyness, introversion, and they avoid situations. Kids have two types of social anxiety. Performance situations, like having to talk in class, having to do any kind of thing in front of people where they're being watched, like it's their turn to kick the ball in the kickball game, or it's their turn to read aloud. Some kids, that will shut them down. The other type of social anxiety is called interactive anxiety, and it's kids who, when assigned to work with a group partner or a project, are terrified of that. Kids who are scared to walk into the lunchroom to figure out who am I going to talk to, who am I going to play with at recess, you know, having to interact with other groups. And so when we have kids who have these social anxieties, it's very treatable, fortunately. The first step is getting them to identify it and be able to say to themselves, okay, I'm feeling social anxiety, this is gonna pass, and it's hard. Kids who have social anxiety have a harder time with comparison, and Facebook, now Meta, has its own research that shows that it knows that Instagram is bad for girls, and they continue to promote Instagram. Girls who use Instagram tend to have more depression, more social anxiety, more trouble. So one of the things we want to teach kids to do is curate their content to protect their mental health. If your kid is getting a ton of ads coming in for diets or for bathing suit sales or for something that's making them feel bad, have them curate and block that out of their newsfeed. Have them recognize you can take that back out. You can take out, if there's a friend whose posts make you feel insecure, you can still stay friends with them and just take them out of your newsfeed. You don't have to feel that way. They'll never know you took them out of your newsfeed. They'll never know. You just stay friends, but you hide them and you feel better. Some kids respond to social anxiety by choosing poor coping behaviors. And we see these are the kids who might engage in, self-harm or eating disordered behavior or doing mean things or hiding behind a phone at social events, pretending that they're doing something just so they don't have to talk to people. They might post inappropriate things. It's not uncommon for kids to respond with impulsivity. And so what we want to do is teach kids to have that distress tolerance, to be able to say, okay, I'm going into this party and I am really anxious about this birthday party. And I recognize that I'm vulnerable to doing this, and this when I'm anxious. Maybe I'm vulnerable to hiding in the corner and not trying to talk. Maybe I'm vulnerable to taking videos of other people and posting them, and that's my behavior. Whatever it is, we want to teach kids how to instead feel what they're feeling, observe it, it's gonna pass, and use some mindfulness to stay in the moment instead of like time traveling to the catastrophic future that they're envisioning for themselves. And this helps with social anxiety. It also helps if kids have a healthy coping mechanism list of alternatives. So one of my kiddos, my middle one, has a box, and in it he has put little folded up pieces of paper with everything that he could ever do that makes him feel better. Listen to my music, play with the dog, watch The Simpsons, whatever it is. And sometimes when he's in a state, he'll just reach in the box and pull it out, whatever it is. He's like, I'll do this, I'll do anything before I do something harmful. And these things help kids in groups. And that's the final thing I want to talk about is groups. So kids are very, very vulnerable to groupthink as they enter their tweens and teens, 8, 9, 10. Tweens are now 8 and 9-year-olds. It's amazing how it's changed. And the desire for conformity grows stronger and stronger as they become tweens and teens. And this is when kids are the most susceptible to peer pressure. And being perceived as different for kids is often seen as more threatening than being perceived as unkind or untruthful. So this might be where you have a child who you know is a good child, who has a good heart, and then you find out your child joined in on some unkind behavior or was a bystander who said nothing. The reason is that kids think it's riskier to stand out and say, stop that, and draw the attention to themselves than to risk being seen as unkind. The kids' behavior at this age does not necessarily reflect their actual values. And that's very reassuring. Sometimes kids will do really crappy things because that's what the group is doing. And that's why we need the deeper conversations and the restorative conversations and the empathy building, so that if a kid does something really awful to someone else, they get to see what was the impact on that person. How did I affect them? Why is it important that I not do that behavior? We have to talk about it. A place where groupthink happens a lot is on social media. One of the things we see is that kids often have multiple accounts. So they have their public account that they share with you when you're like, okay, I'm gonna be your friend on Instagram. Yeah, okay, mom and dad, here's my account. And then they have their private accounts with their inner groups of friends. They have a false sense of security that that's actually private. So they post all kinds of stuff that could be inflammatory in those private groups, and it gets out because kids take screenshots and then share it. It's harder to fix problems, it interferes with school, it explodes, it escalates. This is how social conflict escalates. So we want to, talk about this and say, listen, I know you probably have secret accounts. Let me remind you that if you say something about someone else or post a picture, there's no reason that can't get out. And it's not secure, and we have to be mindful of other people's feelings. Due to the power of crowds and peer pressure, studies show that tweens and teens make poorer choices when they're with their friends than when they're alone. So even when kids have private doubts, they think, oh, well, everyone else is doing it, so it must be okay. And it's especially if an authority figure, like an older child or a babysitter or a coach, an adult, if the authority type figure is doing the bad behavior, the bullying behavior, and sometimes we do see this with coaches, where we do see this sometimes with teachers who are not properly trained, then it's even harder for a child to speak up against it because they feel like the pressure of the authority person. So one thing we can do is teach kids to say to themselves, would I still be doing this if I were alone, right? If there's a devious lick TikTok challenge and kids are about to go destroy the school bathroom with a group of peers, have kids slow down and say, hey, would I be able to do this if I were alone and no one else were around? If not, that's my true value. Let me try and align with that. And The other thing kids can do is practice standing out and being different in ways that feel comfortable, so that when they have to do it in a way that feels scary, they're used to it. And that could be something as simple as everyone wants to go to Panera and you want to go to Noodles, being able to say, I really would rather go to Noodles. Like, that little tiny thing for some kids feels terrifying. If you can't say, I'd rather have pasta than a sandwich because everyone else is having a sandwich and there's the pressure of the group, then it's going to be very hard to say, no, I don't want to go along with it when we take that picture of this other kid and put it online. So, have your kid practice the safe ways. When we want kids to cyber support instead of cyberbullying, there's a few things they can do. They can choose not to click like, not to share things. They can choose to let a friend know if they're being tricked. If there's like the two people on the phone and another one's listening and the child doesn't know and it's, hey, do you like this person or what do you hate about this person? Someone could send a text to say, don't answer this, don't do this. You don't know this, but you're being tricked or other people are listening. If you see a friend making a risky, impulsive decision, we can teach our kids to pull someone aside in private and say, are you sure you want to do this? Like, just slow down and think. And when there are problems, we want to teach kids not to band together to attack attackers. That's how we escalate into big groups of bullying. Instead, if your child wants to do something, have them throw their support towards a target. So, and we see this with adults too. Everyone will rush on Twitter or rush somewhere to attack someone who has been the attacker. The person who really needs you is the person who is attacked. Go flood their wall with you're valuable, you're important, you matter. Put your energy towards that. Break the cycle of escalation and focus on buffering up someone who's in need. Final message for kids, I think, is that some kids need to be taught what a good friend feels like and how to be one. Good friends make you feel welcome every time they see you, not just when someone better isn't around. Good friends let you pick your own friends instead of telling you who is or isn't acceptable to be around. Good friends have good things to say about you when you're not around instead of gossiping or spreading rumors. Good friends use humor in a harmless way, and if you tell them you didn't like it, they stop. Bad friends weaponize your vulnerabilities and pull it back out and use it against you over and over. Emotionally intelligent children will learn how to sense, do I feel comforted and safe and secure around my friends? Do I have good friends? Am I a good friend? And they will actually leave relationships where they don't feel good. I had this happen with my 6th grader last year, had a walking group. She walked to school with a group of kids every day, and she felt nervous before school each morning, anxious. There were some of the kids in the group were not nice to her. And she recognized that it felt bad. And these were kids who were, really hard for her to break into their group. And she self-selected out and started to go hang out with other kids. Now she has a different group that she goes to school with. She left that old walking group. They still meet actually in front of my house because we're on the way to school. And it's not hostile and it's not mean. It's just, she just has found people where she feels like she is excited to run out the door for school, and she can let herself be herself. So that's the healthiest thing we can do, is teach our kids to identify, do I feel good around my people? And if you don't, who are my people is the next question. Where's my group? If we have kids who are struggling with, seeing unkind behaviors, and I know it's 8, so I'm going to stop in just a second, I swear. We also want to teach kids that you're not a snitch if you report that someone's being mistreated. If someone says, hey, why did you try to get that person in trouble? The answer is no, I'm trying to get the target out of trouble. I'm trying to get someone out of trouble. You tell your kids, if someone's being harmed, whether it's you or a friend, you can always anonymously ask an adult for help. You can always say to an adult, someone needs to check in on this situation. I'm trying to get this person out of trouble. If someone's being targeted, they are in trouble. And so that's what we want kids to focus on. And this also goes back to this idea of having multiple tribes. The more places where your child has an attachment or a connection, the more people they will stand up for, and it insulates them. So if your child is on band and is part of this group and part of that group, if your kid gets kicked out of one group, but they have friends here and there, and someone at AYSO and someone in swim team, someone at their community, their youth group, it's very insulating against the isolation that can happen and the ostracizing that can happen. So we want multiple tribes for our kids. And I know we're pretty much at the end, so actually the last one is important. I'm gonna this will be the last slide I do, and it's this. Ultimately, we wanna teach kids that it's true you can only have so many people who are part of your inner circle. If you're doing a carpool to a party, you can only fit 4 or 5 people in your car. There is some selection. However, natural exclusion is when these are the people you are best friends with, you love them, you choose them, they're your sleepover people, they're your ride or dies, but you are welcoming to others. You make eye contact with other kids. You greet them by name. You don't talk excessively about your plans with your favorite people if you're standing right next to someone who's not part of it. If there's an event and there's a carpool and someone asks to be part of your carpool, you try your best to try and see if there's a way to fit them in. And if not, you say to them, I'm sorry that I can't, that there's not room in my car. Do you want help finding someone else who might be able to drive you, instead of just icing them out? So it's you stay respectful. Aggressive exclusion is what we want to discourage. And aggressive exclusion is when you have a group of kids who are like, these are my favorite people, these are the people I want, and I don't want you, and I'm gonna make sure you know it. I'm gonna go out of my way to make sure you know you're not in my group. I will not make eye contact with you. I won't partner with you. If I happen to be standing next to you in line, I'll turn my back to you and pretend you don't exist. I will talk about my plans with other people in front of you. I will post pictures and tag everyone in the group but you, even if you're in the picture. I will make sure you feel invisible. This is aggressive exclusion. And everyone knows what it looks like, and it's not okay. And we just have to say that to the kids. Everyone should greet other people by name. It makes a huge difference. Just to teach them to greet people with eye contact and name, even if they're not part of the group. So I guess that's where I'll stop, because I want to leave room for questions, and I'll leave for you to look at a slide about resilience. I really appreciate the chance to talk about these things. They're so important and so formative, and your life as parents is so much easier if your kids are in healthy relationships, because your own energy isn't sucked right out of the marrow of your bones trying to keep them from having meltdowns around their social lives. And they're better able to learn. If the kids who are very stressed at school about what's going on in their social lives are not going to engage in their learning, it just won't happen. And so this social emotional learning actually is like, that has to come first. And then we do math and English and Spanish and theater and all the other things. And I think schools are starting to learn that, which I think is great. So thank you. And I'm here if you have questions, and I'll share my slides. And I know there's a lot of info. Does anybody have a question? I'm happy to answer. Yes?
How do we get a copy of your slides?
Oh, okay, so should I email the slide deck to you, Martha? What do you want me to do?
Yes, April, maybe we'll get some paper and we'll have people write down their emails.
Yeah, and, I will also do this. I'm very good about this, and it's a small group, so I don't mind. I'll give you, my email is on here. Do you see my email? Carrie@carriegoldmanauthor.com. If you email me and you just say, I was at Hauser, can I have your slide deck? I'll drop you the PDF in my email too. I'm happy to do it. I wouldn't do it if it were like hundreds of people, but I'm
Because you
happy to
don't
do
want
it.
us to put it on our website, right? Like that was the other.
I mean, HarperCollins, who published my book, is a little weird about me putting too much out in a public arena. And I already really push the limits on that because I give my slides out left and right. But I think it's more important that the information be out there. So if you email me, I'll definitely